All right, it is time to recap week number 6. The IHSA football season, 2/3 of the way through. Thank you for joining us here on Friday Night Drive as we do our weekly recap here. As it is Monday night as we are taping it. I'm Matt Rodewald. He's Steve Soucie. How was your weekend of football otherwise?
Pretty good. It was one of those weeks where I thought we might get some answers. We went through a couple of weeks previous where I don't know how many we got, but I think we got some answers in week 6. And that's always fun for what I do, for everybody else does. Give some people some stuff to talk about.
We could get all the answers we want on Friday night, but I want to start with Saturday first because you wrote it today in your What We Learned column, the Wild Western Illinois Valley. Can we start there? Give them some love because there's plenty of upsets and surprises up in the Chicagoland area. I want to make sure we hit Southern Illinois. I love that conference, with Camp Point Central, having seen them in person the last couple of years, calling the state finals games. And I just think there's some good 1A football down there. But, boy, I did not see a shutout coming from Carrollton. And Calhoun beat Camp Point Central in week 1. So it's the transitive properties a mess in that conference for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a very interesting conference for the people that don't know. I mean, it's 12 teams, 2 divisions down there. Yeah. And while a lot of people talk about the NUIC and how strong they are and how they tend to send someone to the state finals, that conference has got a pretty good track record of doing it as well. Winning the state title last year with Camp Point Central, beating Lena Winslow in the final. A lot of people didn't see that coming, but Camp Point has demonstrated that it's been a pretty consistently good program. They've made numerous semifinal runs, a couple of title runs, and now winning that championship last year. That's a really good program. And then you kind of looked at it coming into the year and you figure, yeah, they're probably likely to repeat there. Come right out of the gates, you've got Hardin Calhoun beat them. And then you're like, well, hold on a minute. Who's the team down here? And then, Calhoun's rolling along after that win against Camp Point Central. It looks like they're the team. And then all of a sudden I see the score pop up on my screen. I'm like, wow, not only did they get beat, they got shut out by Carrollton, a team that already had 3 losses. So I was like, well, what's going on there? And then 5 minutes later, I find out about what happened with Jacksonville Route and Camp Point Central also playing on a Saturday afternoon. Route lines up for a potential game-winning field goal, gets whistled for encroachment. They back it up 5 yards. It's the field goal.
Yep.
So Camp Point Central full-out escape there, getting out of there with their win. So definitely kind of a jumble there, and it shows that there are multiple teams in that conference that I think we might hear from in the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's Althoff and everyone else down south for a moment, but, as case in point last year, Camp Point Central had a lot of experience, and they beat Althoff and, ran down, that was a bowling ball downhill. They were up 30-0 in the first half of that game. So something we've talked about on the show before. So I don't know if anyone can beat them, but you're right about one thing. There's some really good football. It's NUIC all the time, but Western Illinois Valley is a pretty good conference. And, we like to make sure that we give them some credit. Don't forget, Carrollton was in a state championship game a couple of years ago as well. I think it was 21 when they were in the title game at Northern. Last time it was up here. So there's some good football down there. All right, we got a couple of commenters too. So if you're watching us live, definitely jump in the comments. Brother Rice, can we start with Brother Rice and Mount Carmel and how that game went, in terms of just the impact of it? We know it made a big difference for Brother Rice. You've been able to look at the numbers and the projections and kind of shuffling a little bit. How much of a difference did that win make for Brother Rice going forward?
Well, it's pretty substantial just in the grand scheme of things. It looks likely now that at minimum, Brother Rice can probably get to 4 wins. Now, I mean, granted, the back end of their schedule, no cupcakes there, but, you have a pretty reasonable path to possibly getting to 5. And, if we had this conversation last week, I would have thought we would have been looking at a situation where Brother Rice is going to need to win 2 or 3 down the stretch just to get themselves in a position where they, were clinching a playoff berth and had to get 1 of 3 just to get to that 4. Well, now I think they're almost guaranteed to get to 4. And now they just need 1 of those 2 on the back end to get themselves to 5. And their point situation is good enough now that as long as we need a few teams, if Brother Rice just gets to 4, they're probably still going to get in. So obviously they don't want to get in that way, but if they had to, they could. So for them, it was a pretty substantial situation just based on who they have left and where we were going over the. I mean, because they're not done with blue games. They finished with St. Ignatius in week 9, and that's by no means a slam dunk win for Brother Rice in that situation. So, they just now they can breathe a little bit. When you walk into those last 3 games, sitting there where you potentially already have 4 losses in the bank. I mean, that's and the thing about Brother Rice that kind of gets overlooked in the shuffle. I mean, those previous 3 losses, they were all by a touchdown.
Yeah,
they were in all of those games. So it's not like they were taking a bunch of losses and getting whipped off the field. I mean, they were right in all of those games. Potentially a break or two. We might have been talking about a Brother Rice team that was entering that game against Mount Carmel with a 4-1 record. I mean, it could have easily been that way, but for them, it had to be a relief to finish off a close game with a win and not walk off the field thinking one more play and this might have gone a different way.
I want to bring up the Mount Carmel angle in a second, but you alluded to it, 4-5, 5-4, and without giving anything away, because we want people to see those projections. Where are you with the 4-5? Just the tendencies that you've seen in terms of where we went this week versus last week, and how many 4-5 teams might be needed to fill the field.
Well, I still think we're possibly pushing double figures there.
Okay.
I think we're somewhere in the range of 8 to 12, I think, is a possibility here.
Okay.
We've still got we've talked about this before, about the parity, about the situations that we're going into. We have less undefeated teams than we usually have at this point. We have less one-loss teams at this point. And a bunch of those one-loss teams, I was just looking at this earlier tonight, nearly 20 of those one-loss teams are playing either an undefeated, another 5-1, or a 4-2 team this week. So, when we look at that, on top of it, you got a whole bunch of those situations where those one-loss teams, a good healthy pack of them are going to come out of it with 2 losses. The 2-loss group is huge. The 3-loss group is huge. Some of those teams are going to lose. So we're seeing a move down towards teams having 3 and 4 losses when we still have 3 games to go. And there are some really good programs in that list. So just the math ain't mathin' if you start talking about how we're going to get all these teams to 5 victories. It's just, I don't want to say it's impossible, because it's not. But every week that you look at it, you see a scenario where it's like, we're definitely going to have a few. And there's a road to a whole bunch.
Yeah, and you're going to need this to happen and that to happen. And that list gets longer and longer at this point. I can see that. One of those non-unbeaten teams is Mount Carmel, having their most losses in a season since 2021. Where do you make of them? I know they've not been 100% healthy, and I know that Jordan Lynch is kind of holding his cards close to the vest, so to speak, and what he's going to be doing here and where his team is. But what do you make of where they are with 2 losses on the season right now?
It's funny when you look at it. I mean, you still have that Loyola game looming in week 9. Yeah. You have Joliet Catholic this week. So when you start talking about them in the construct of where they're going to be, I mean, with Jack Elliott missing that game last week, is he back this week? I don't know. I don't know the clarity of that. They have a good backup quarterback, but you're still playing Joliet Catholic. I mean, this week, it's not like you're going to be able to, take some pages out of the book and expect a cruise. I mean, that's unrealistic. So it's hard to kind of put my finger on where I expect Mount Carmel to end up at this point, to be completely honest, because what they have left on their schedule, you can see a scenario, honestly, and I don't think it's that far-fetched, that maybe Mount Carmel goes into the playoffs as a 5-4 team. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibilities. And then they've got a 28 seed sitting on the, next to their name, because they're going to have a bunch of points. So, but how do you feel about that? I got a top 5 seed in the playoffs. Who we're going to play in the first round? Bet it's a game we can probably, we can probably ease into the second round there, and then the draw pops up and you see 28 Chicago Mount Carmel sitting down there. I mean,
I think
it's a possibility.
I think at this point, when you're thinking about how Mount Carmel does, and it gets to a week 9 game with Mount Carmel Loyola, I think if you're West Aurora, you're paying very close attention to seeing if Loyola can win that game. Because if they don't, they're probably coming out to your building.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it. And, you know, that's exactly the kind of matchup we talk about all the time, where that 8A team or that 7A team that, well, their schedule's not very good or not very tested. And well, this is what happens as a result of that, because this is how the playoffs are set up. So, you know, for years we've seen the South Elgin type teams, you know, go 9-0 and then find themselves in a tough matchup in either round 1 or 2. And this is a scenario where a lot of the Catholic League teams, Loyola, Mount Carmel, even if Joliet Catholic loses, they're going to have an extra loss. I mean, all of a sudden you have some teams that are going to be dangerous low seeds that will find themselves with an advantageous path to the postseason. If they, maybe it's better for some of these teams to fall by the wayside to get that path. I mean, nobody wants that, but that's something where you don't take a loss as hard because of what it could turn into in week 10.
You know, and we had talked about this a little bit before.
So as we look at the 48 teams, go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before. I just think we're going to end up getting a lot of first-round matchups this year where it's like, how is that a first-round matchup? I mean, it's just I think that's just the way the seeds are going to fall. We're just going to have some very strange teams, you know, that are popping up. I shouldn't say strange, different teams than we're used to seeing, like in the top 10.
There's a novelty to it. I like it.
You know, it's just the labeling of it is just going to be a lot different than we're used to, and that's where it's going to come from, and I can't wait for it to all sort out, because as some of these power programs pile up losses, there's really no other places for them to go. Like, you're going to start to see them in the middle of the draw playing one another, and you know that's 15-18 game, 16-17 game, where it's going to be guys that have won, you know, multiple state titles over the last couple of years squaring off in the first round. I think that's something that we're heading to, and I like it. I think it's kind of fun, but
I do too.
I'm sure the other, you know, some of the other people in the bracket are not too fond of it. So, you know, it's all kind of a weighing thing, but I really am intrigued to see what happens, because, like I said a little bit in the story that will come out Wednesday in regards to the playoff projection, there wasn't a lot of movement this week in regards to who got in and, you know, who was in and who was not in last week. What did move, and moved in almost every classes, the seed stacks are all over the place. They're all over. They're way different than they were a week before.
You know, when I look at these unbeaten teams, 48 of them, which is fascinating. There's got to be one or two that jump off the page to you that is, you know, they're no longer surprises, right? At this point, they're just kind of no longer surprises.
Yeah, there are a few. You know, East Richland has to be at the top of that list. Mm-hmm. You know, 0-9 last season, 6-0 currently, and in week 6 had that proving ground game. They played downstate Mount Carmel, a team that has dominated the Little Illini Conference for several years, was in the state championship game last year, and they trucked them.
It was a road game, right?
Yeah. So it was definitely a situation where, you know, you're like, okay, that's not taking advantage of a weak schedule. That's a legitimately solid football team. So really looking forward to the down the line matchup with them with Casey Westfield. I think that'll tell us even more, but that was a defining win, in my opinion, as far as the undefeated group. Another team that is on that list, one of my, of course, they share the nickname, but I love the nickname. The New Bernland Pretzels were another move to 6-0. They beat Olympia in the Sangamo, and that was a game that I was looking at saying, okay, New Berlin, maybe they didn't have a lot of really challenging schedule in the first 5 weeks. Maybe Olympia brings them back down to earth, but nope, they won that game, and now they have Williamsville this week. So it's definitely going to be a kind of a little bit of a mini gauntlet here for New Berlin, but it's always nice to see a team like that pop up out of nowhere. Haven't made the playoffs since 2015. They're obviously in now with 6 wins.
A team that's 6-0 that's kind of jumped off the page is the Frem Vikings, because of what they did to Barrington. 56 points, and the defense had the final say in that with a pick 6. But Johnny O'Brien just slinging it all over the field, and they're as dangerous as they can get in 8A at this point. At some point, it was like, wow, they're 5-0, they're 4-0, or whatever. You put that win on your resume, all of a sudden you're a championship contender in 8A.
Well, it was interesting to me. I mean, I thought that Fremd could win that football game. I would not have scripted that win in the way that it went. I'll be completely honest with you. I thought that it would maybe be hey, we got some defensive stops and scraped out enough points to pick up that win. Nope. Fremd was scoring at a rapid and relentless pace, and we're like, try and match us. That was not the blueprint that I thought that they would follow to win that game.
The other ones that jump off for me, Woodstock North. We talked a little bit about them each and every week of what they've been doing through kind of a muddy Kishwaukee River Conference, but they've stayed unscathed, and 6-0 they've earned it at this point, and they've only been to 7 wins, 2 times in their school's history, which for some of us old heads thinks, well, they're not that old. No, it's a 20-year-old school now. That matters. So 6-0 is a big deal up there,
and they've never been to 7-0. That's never happened. So for them, I mean, obviously trying to make some real serious school history here. Big game this week with Richmond Burton, but if they win it, I think you've almost cemented that crazy Kishwaukee River Conference in your favor, and you've put yourself at 7-0 for the first time. 7-0, I think, in most realm of possibility is going to pretty much guarantee you a home playoff game, which is another thing I don't know if they've ever had. So, I mean, the laundry list of accomplishments for that program that they've already assembled, and we've still got 3 weeks of season left to go, is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and you know what? I think about what their schedule looks like for the rest of the way, because if they're 8-0 and they have to go to Woodstock, that town is going to have a fun time with that in week 9. I can only imagine what the atmosphere for the students would be like more than anything else. I mean, you've seen games like that before, but I can't imagine it could be any bigger than that one for sure.
Yeah, it would definitely be one of those things where you look at it on paper and you're like, well, there's definitely a chance for the other school in town to play spoiler here, and I'm sure they would like nothing more than to do that. But for Woodstock North to be in the position to even make that happen, considering, before the season, I didn't see this coming at all. They continue to convince me on a week-to-week basis that this is a legitimate run, but it took a while for me to get there, to be completely honest with you.
They have won 1 playoff game in their entire school's history back in 2012, and they haven't made the playoffs with less than 3 wins before. So in week 10, they've never had a home game in November. So I would imagine at this point, 1 win guarantees that at this point to get to 7-0. But let's see. This conference is kind of a funky one throughout the entire football season for sure. Let's switch over to a couple of other unbeaten teams before we move on. Let's have some fun because we're ready to go for Dixon's drive down south to Johnston City. They both got to 6-0. How about that?
Yeah, it's definitely one that, we talked about it before. Use those forfeit wins. Entertain us, please. We've talked about this a lot. Bring the entertainment, please. So kudos to both of these programs to start. I mean, obviously, logistically, this is not exactly the easiest thing to pull off. At first I thought maybe
it's a long bus ride.
Maybe these 2 teams would be meeting in the middle somewhere. They're not. Dixon's making that trip down there. And I've become more and more intrigued with this team throughout the season and what they've been able to do. Everybody talks Byron in the Big Northern, and deservedly so. But Dixon's trying to keep lockstep with them. I mean, they are right there. They are winning these games by substantial margins, putting up huge amounts of points, to the point where I think that, if you would have asked me before the season, I would have said Byron probably takes them down pretty easily. I still say Byron's the favorite. Byron's the king until they're not. But I'm looking forward to that Week 8 game, and I think this Week 7 game is going to tell us a lot about Dixon. Granted, Johnston City is a 2A team, but they're an undefeated 2A team, and they're a good program. Historically, they've done pretty well. So, I don't think Dixon's going to go down and overwhelm them because they're a 4A school and Johnston City is a 2A school. So I'll be real interested to see what comes out of that and what Dixon takes away from it. And when they come back, and obviously, that long trip leaves them a little bit shortened on the big prep week for Byron. But once again, I'd much rather have teams doing things like this than walking away with the forfeit victory, because both of these teams are going to the playoffs. They don't need to worry about, if I take a loss in this game, it's going to hurt me and all this other stuff. They're putting it out there because they know they're both two good programs, and they're trying to get better and learn something from this opportunity.
21 points in 6 games. I mean, it's ridiculous, the numbers they're putting up. 71 in this past contest. The Soucie, they were up 64-0 at halftime. They've had a lot of blowouts where they haven't been able to learn about themselves. So I think just getting a test by a Johnston City team, maybe they win by 3 touchdowns. I don't know. I do think it's going to be a good game, but I think this is an opportunity to learn something about your football team going into Byron. And I don't know if it was a forfeit was going to help you. So either way, I think this is good for them to have a matchup, and honestly to have that road trip experience so that they're ready for the postseason. Because, hey, you just never know how these road trips are going to go when you get deep into November. I want to switch a little bit here and to ask you about the Chicagoland Prairie, because we've seen Seneca win games in the regular season, but we've also seen Seneca deal with forfeits left and right over the last couple of years. There's been a rash of forfeits in that league. Can you just explain the issues that are going on in that league and maybe some of the problems that people are dealing with in terms of not only fielding a team, but how it's impacting other teams?
Well, originally this was a conference that had 8 teams in it. And what happened was there several of them defected and went to the Upstate 8, which expanded. And when that happened, it left them with an odd number. And there were already a couple of programs in that league that were having trouble fielding full programs. One of them stepped away and went to the independent group, which was Westmont. Another, Walter Christian, has always had problems, kind of putting together, a full roster over the last couple years. They've now forfeited back-to-back games and are now on their way to forfeiting a third here, which they will against Seneca. And, part of the problem with the way that has broken down is a lot of these teams have been able to find games with other teams that had this happen, but they knew about it for a while. They didn't know about Walter Christian until just recently. So those teams that they could have maybe tried to work something out in July or maybe even in August, where it's like, okay, you got an opening, I got an opening, let's go play, that those options weren't available to me. I mean, for example, Seneca reached out to me this week and said, is anybody open in week 7? I mean, like early over the course of the weekend. And my response was, yeah, there's one team open, but I don't think you want that smoke. And it was Nazareth, because they're getting the LaSalle. And, of course the response was, yeah, I don't think we're ready for that. But, but that's where we're at right now. There's just not a lot of options at this late in the game. So, not that you want to see any team fold up the tent, but if Walter Christian sensed this happening, it might have been better for everyone involved to say, hey, do this in August instead of going 2 weeks into the season and then saying, hey, we're packing it up for the year.
I was coaching in the middle of that COVID spring season. And so when games are getting called because of COVID left and right, and you're trying to find somebody in a matter of hours, even days, to come out to you. Oh, yeah, and because of the restrictions, you were stuck in a conference. You had to get all the schools to vote them into the conference for like an hour and then vote them out, that sort of thing, so that you could allow them to play. The IHSA stepped in and said, no, we can't be doing that because of insurance and all that, which made sense. It definitely made sense. But I do remember being on the phone helping, with DeKalb, and we lost the game against, I think it was Naperville Central. And we had to, we're looking for somebody. And Phillips called me. And this is the heyday of Phillips. And I thought, you want to come out to DeKalb? Great. And Northern said, you want to play it here? So it was one of those, just come over to that building and play. And, I understand how difficult it is on a Tuesday or a Monday to say, how in the world are we going to get somebody ready for Friday? In the past, it was like, no, you can't do it. It's impossible. COVID taught us you can do it, but you also have to have a lot of things go your way. And for all these teams that are losing games to forfeit, I feel terrible for them. And this is why you and I point to the Johnston cities and Dixons. and saying, good for you. Glad you're putting it on the schedule. You guys should do it. That's why I've been championing Rochelle and Marian Catholic in week 9, because they have openings. Figure it out. I'd like to see it happen. And I know Seneca didn't want to play Nazareth. I get why. But part of me says, how do we make it work where it's fair for everyone, even for the underclass Nazareth kids to have, or even second or third team on that roster? I don't know. But you can see it's just not a perfect system. And, injuries really, you got to be careful with these things now. And so that's it's just too bad. It's just one of those things that's sad about what we're dealing with in the middle of the season, because it kills the kids' experience. And if there's anything we learned in COVID, you really don't want to do that, because it impacts them way more than you think.
Yeah, it is a tough situation, but I don't know what the easy answer is, to be completely honest with you. I don't know if there is one. So, really what it comes down to is, I play matchmaker a lot during the off season. It's one of those situations where I'm willing to help in those situations when they come up, but sometimes the cards are taken out of the deck for me. I just don't have anything to offer. So it does become a little bit tricky. And it's a delicate balance when you're talking about getting everybody an opponent, getting all close to 500 teams a weekly opponent when you've got imbalanced conferences and you've got, odd numbered conferences where there's not natural pairings. It becomes a really, really tricky situation. And I think a lot of these schools have come up with creative solutions for these problems, but you can only patch so many holes in the dam.
Yeah.
Really, when it comes right down to it. So it's a challenge that we face, and I'm not sure exactly what the correct answer or the correct fix would be. Sometimes you're just going to have those situations, and it is not a new problem. I get irritated when people talk to me about this. There have been, I can remember as far back as 15 to 20 years ago, there would be forfeits that were rolled out there by two teams that were on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And they probably could have played the game, but, they didn't want to get, dominated. So they said, well, this is probably what's going to happen. we're going to chalk it up as a forfeit and move on to the next week when we might have this is not a new concept. I will shout that from the mountaintops if anybody wants to argue with me about it.
You piqued my interest, though, just because you have been matchmaker. Is there a game that you can tell us about that you help facilitate that you're like, yeah, that one worked out pretty well? Or you do know, and maybe you don't want to share that. I don't know.
It didn't turn out as well as I hoped, but I was really happy that Hope Academy and Wilmington agreed to a week 1 game this year.
Yeah.
That was one that I facilitated. I got those two together. But but that's the kind of thing, like, there are a lot of times, I can tell you on the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of times I've had conversations with people. I'm like, hey, this is a good idea. And they're like, well, yeah, maybe. I'm like, come on. Like, every once in a while, I wish I had a gavel and a hammer that said, it's done. Stop arguing about it. Like, just let's go. Trust me, I've hatched a whole bunch of more interesting games that have not come to fruition, unfortunately.
I think the fun part was seeing it in COVID in not just football, but basketball too. In football, you saw, I think Lamont played Bolingbrook. I'm like, yeah, all right, let's see. There's nothing on the line. Let's just play. We're not worried about a playoff bid. And in basketball, you saw that too. Out by me, Hinkley Big Rock played Canelan, and then they were ready to go play DeKalb. I'm like, all right, you sure you're ready? You know what? It doesn't matter. Just do it. Just figure it out.
The thing that was really fascinating to me about the COVID football season is it was like someone would call me and say, we just got dropped. You got anybody for me? I'm like, call these guys. And then they 10 minutes later, they'd be like, got a game. I'm like, I've never seen it work like this before. I'm like, I wish it worked like this all the time, because usually I'll make a suggestion and people will fret and hem and haw and go, what do you know about them? And how good are they? And blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, during the COVID season, someone would call me or message me and be like, what do you got? I'd send them a name. 5 minutes later, I get a text back. Yep, we're playing Friday. I'm like, perfect. Sounds great. Let's go.
I would love to see more of that. All right, well, we can talk about this all day. I want to be able to switch to some of the other things that we have. As you're listening to the Friday Night Drive recap of Week 6, Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you as we continue for a couple more minutes here anyway. Can we talk about the city of Sterling? Because when Sterling football is good, no matter which school it is, Illinois football as a whole is better. And Sterling started 0-2. Newman started 0-1. And neither of them have lost ever since. How about the city of Sterling? Some love for both Newman Catholic, the Comets, and, of course, the Warriors, too.
Yeah, that's fun. It's fun when you get obviously those two teams aren't going to meet. There's obviously differences about it. But, when you look at just kind of how those programs are kind of linked with one another, even though they don't play, it's nice to see them when they get on a roll. And I think when you have a conference, especially the one that Sterling plays in, the Western Big Six, a lot of programs out of there with a lot of pedigree and a lot of success in their past. So it's always kind of fun when you've got numerous teams in that conference that are pretty good. So you've got games lined up on a weekly basis that look pretty interesting on paper. Quincy's the big dog right now, and deservedly so. But some of those other teams are putting together nice seasons and quietly going about their business. Moline is having a fine year. Sterling's been playing well. And then when you look at Sterling Newman, maybe they're not quite at where it was Sterling Newman, but It's to see them back in the mix here, where you look at those games when they're playing a Princeton, they're playing a Rockridge, they're playing, now Monmouth emerging. When you're playing those teams and you feel like, hey, we're going to get a good football game tonight between two good football teams, that's always fun.
Yeah, and of course, Moline 4-2 now. They can score some points, as I've noticed looking up and down their schedule. And the big one this weekend is Sterling and Quincy, as Sterling has to go out to Quincy to play against the Blue Devils. So that'll be fun to watch to see how that turns out. So the other thing I wanted to get to here, and it's taken me a lot of resistance to get to it as long as I have, that Geneva win over Batavia sent some shockwaves around the state. What are some of the reactions you're hearing with what Geneva did at Batavia on Friday night?
No one's saying that they didn't think that Geneva was a very good football team. But the expectation from a lot of people looking at that game from the outside, especially with the track record that we have, that can't be ignored. I mean, Batavia has dominated the series for quite a while. So you just kind of felt like, Geneva can make a ball game out of it. But, probably in the end, it'll probably be the way that it always is. Batavia will finish it off and take the W. But the way that Geneva went about it, really, really impressive. It makes you kind of rethink things in terms of what does it really mean. I mean, it's like Geneva, clearly a really, really good football team, moved into the top 10 of the Friday Night Drive power rankings. That's where they belong, I think, after this win. But now you start to think of it in a different context. Can they win 6A North? How does a potentially Geneva cary-grove game, what does it look like? I mean, that's a conversation,
Yes.
And it's I don't know if it was a conversation before this result. I think it was, people are kind of thinking, hey, it's all setting up for another cary-grove East St. Louis game. And then you got somebody in the back of the room going, hey, what about us? We're over here. It's like that's a very interesting thing that's kind of developing here, that I don't know if it was something that I was even acknowledging maybe 2 weeks ago, that it was something that, might be in the cards.
Over the years, as Geneva has continued to get better, and again, if you don't listen to this podcast, I'm from Geneva. So that's kind of not so much a bias, just in the sense that I'm so familiar with the history of it. And when you look at what's gone on the last couple of years, Batavia's blown out Geneva for a long time. A good 7 straight game shutout wins. Like, they didn't score on them for years. And when they did score, there was a sarcastic cheer from the other side going, hey, good for you guys. You're able to get on the board. But as Geneva's gotten better in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe the last 2 or 3 years, let's go with that, Batavia also has gotten better. So they've raised the game too. So it's been a matter of frustration where it's like, man, even though this town's putting some teams together, so are they still. And so there's that hesitation to say, well, this is the year that they're going to beat them. But when you walked out of that building on Friday night, there was a different feeling of confidence and assuredness that, yeah, you belong here. And that's something that no matter what rivalry you're in, it is a relief feeling. It has nothing to do with like confidence and cheering and yay, we're 16 and 17-year-olds. We're everything that we read ourselves in the paper to be. No, there's definitely that feeling of, well, now that we can get through this step, we can get through a lot of steps. And so that was something that was fascinating to watch. I'll leave this point with this. I went to Mass on Saturday night, start the homily at St. Peter Church in Geneva, and they congratulated Geneva's win on Batavia. The entire congregation erupted into applause, which I've never seen in 40 years of going to that church. So, wow. Yes, that meant something here. And so kudos to that team. And you know what? I think they learned a lot about themselves. And not just the fact that, hey, we're a good football team, but, they can play some defense. I think they learned they could play some defense. And, yeah, they have some weapons that are balanced attack. And I think for Batavia, it was a really good wake-up call because they're a good football team. They can do a lot of things. They got a great running back. They got a couple of weapons on the offensive side. And we know their defense is very good. As I said, for weeks coming into that game, this might refocus them to do some serious damage in 7A and put themselves back in position. Mount Carmel may not be on that side for them based on where their schedule is going. So they might have a different path to the postseason, and it'll be interesting to see how it turns out for Batavia in 7A. But for Geneva, the doors have been flung wide open and say, all right, what are the possibilities? They're endless at this point. So 6A is going to be fun to watch, I think. And, just the fact that you had Libertyville continuing to roll, we just don't know how good that team is. Kankakee keeps doing Kankakee things. I think they're a very good team as well. And then you go to 7A and you got Downers Grove North, who passed test number 1, and now they have test number 2 coming up this weekend with Lions. What do you make of what Owen Lansu and company did this past week?
Well, that was really impressive when you look at it on paper. And the thing that I think has really kind of been put to the side a little bit and probably should not be is prior to York getting 2 touchdowns on, in their game, with Downers Grove North, no one else had scored more than a touchdown against them all season. That's a really good defense too. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talk a lot about Lanzu and what he's doing and all this other stuff, but that defense is excellent. And that's the kind of thing that if they can continue to do that in the 7A playoffs, when the weather gets a little bit colder and you need a stop, if they can count on that kind of defensive performance throughout the 7A playoffs, I pity their opponents, to be completely honest with you, because the combination of being able to do some great things on offense with a defense that can lock things down at times, that's going to be a really, really difficult team to dispatch.
Lincoln Way East scored 48 points this week, once again setting the standard of making the attempted average points per game this season at 48.5. We're working on it. They're going to continue to do it. Who's as good as they are in the 8A right now? Is it hard to tell?
I'm not sure if anybody is, to be completely honest with you. I think this is a really good football team that I thought at this point in the season might have someone push them, and I don't think anybody has. And I'm not sure if there's anybody left on the regular season schedule that will, to be completely honest with you. That's where we're at. I think the gap is pretty substantial. It's one of those things where, it's kind of snowballed with them. They obviously believe right now that they can do whatever they want, especially offensively, because no one has told them that they can't. So, right now, that's the perfect cohesion right now of having some extremely good talent with a coaching staff that if you're not aware of them, I can tell you this, they're not going to be out prepared. They might beat you, but they're going to be prepared for whatever anybody brings to the table against them. And the combination of those two things, having some absolutely tremendously skilled players combined with a coaching staff that prepares for almost every single alternative that can possibly come up in a game, that makes them just a super dangerous program, and one that I don't think anybody really relishes playing right now.
It's an angry team, I think, in a good sense, because of having been there so close a couple times and then just not having enough, not just to stay in a tight game, but just never feeling like they were within reach. Not getting blown out, but I felt like the last 2 times they played Loyal, it's been like, they've not matched up. So I think just that alone has driven the senior class, and I think it's fascinating to watch this year with the groups here. I will look at a team that has Mateo Valley this week. I might get to go watch them. And Naperville Central goes to Lincoln Way East week 9. Curious to see what that is and if they'll give them a game, because Naperville Central is an awfully good team. I think it's going to say a lot about the disparity, that 8A disparity, especially in that sector of the bracket more than anything else. As we wrap up here, I mentioned Sterling is a good example of this. A team that starts 0-2, like drifts away from everyone's radar, and then slowly finds their way back in the radar. Who's that team that's doing that for you right now? For me, it's Palatine.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. To be honest with you, it would be one that I would put on a very short list of teams, and it's interesting. I mean, we're going to find out a lot more on Thursday. They've got Fremd. Yep. That's going to be a heck of a football game. But there are several that you're just kind of looking at it in the situation that it was like that. The team that's kind of snuck up on me right now, and it wasn't necessarily because they lost in their opening game, but it's Fenwick. So for me, they didn't lose in the opening game. All of a sudden, I look at the paper and they're 5-1, and they beat some good teams along the way, and they just kind of snuck up on me to get there. And it's like now I'm looking at them and I'm like, and they're dangerously close to 6-0. The only reason they lost the game was they had a failed conversion against Joliet Catholic in the fourth quarter. They could have won that game too. So I think that's the team that's kind of like slowly has gained a little bit of momentum. And I'm like, oh, what's going on there? I mean, and it told me a lot more. I mean, I wasn't sure, like with St. Lawrence being the only undefeated team left in the CCL, I wasn't sure if they were going to be able to maintain that, obviously, but Fenwick handled them in that game. They took care of business. They built a pretty substantial lead, and then it ended up being a 2-touchdown game. But I think for me, that team that's kind of building momentum and doing so kind of quietly is Fenwick.
We got a good one for you. Maybe Sandburg is a team that we talked about, but still 5-1 and kind of like sneaking along. They had a tight win over Lincoln Way Central this past weekend. Bennett is still 5-1 when you get deeper into the classes and seeing where they are. Wheaton Academy is 5-1. Nobody's talked about that. We haven't talked about them at all in any of our shows. And then a team that you might get to go see this week, Coal City at 5-1 is also kind of on that quiet list of they're good, but we really haven't talked much about what they have had the ability to do. And I'm interested to see what these teams can do. One of my teams that even go even deeper into the rankings here, downstate, DuQuoin, 5-1. They started quietly, and now they've rattled off a couple in a row here and getting a win over West Frankfort at home. I kind of like
the one.
They're at 5-1.
One fun note about Wheaton Academy that you mentioned them in that list of teams there. They lost their opening game to a team out of Houston, Texas, Second Baptist. And I track these things because I have to for playoff point information and all this other stuff. And I've been keeping track of what Second Baptist has been doing. And if you don't know, I believe there are almost 1,000 high school football teams in Texas. So
easily.
Also, so Houston Second Baptist started the season in whatever I was looking at, ranked around 350 out of those teams. Good, but not
that's good.
Okay. Now they just cracked the top 100. That's a good football team. And Wheaton Academy only lost to them by 2 points. So maybe we should be talking a little bit more about this Wheaton Academy program than we are, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, you're probably right for sure, and I'm curious to see who they have this weekend. So Coal City and Wilmington, that's kind of where you're thinking this weekend, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
I'm trying to figure out where Wheaton Academy has, and I don't have it in front of me naturally, just when I wanted to see where they're at this weekend. So and that's why these conferences sometimes they force my confusion more than anything else. So I'll be very curious to see that. Thursday, I'm going to try and get over to Palatine and Fremd. Friday, still not sure yet. I'm curious to see maybe Naperville Central if I can get it for a quarter and come back. So there's some good football to be had. If you can get out Thursday, you can get out Friday, even Saturday as well. Long weekend, get to do that. And we are getting closer and closer to pairing show weekend. Are you getting extra sleep ahead of week 9? Just so that you can give yourself your all. Friday night.
I haven't quite started that regiment yet, but I got to get there pretty soon because that makes for a long night. And then the problem with that being a long night heading into it is some of these people that are looking for information don't have any boundaries. My phone keeps chiming at 4:30 in the morning because these guys aren't going to sleep, so they want to know what's going on. So It's always factoring in, but it's like my Christmas, to be completely honest with you. So that's I enjoy that process. And by the way, to solve your riddle there, I don't even know where this school is that Wheaton Academy is playing in week 7. They're going to Christ the King. I don't even know where that's located. So
that's in the city somewhere.
Can't help you there. I'm not even sure where it's at. So, yep.
We'll find out. Maybe we'll get a score on time. I don't know. Yep. We're just going to hope for the best in that one. Yep. So, all right. Well, make sure you get your regimen of get it all written down. The bananas, the fluids. St. Charles North defensive coordinator Keith Snyder. He's a big pickle juice guy. You cramp up there, he's going to hand you just a bottle of pickle juice and say, go. And it's weird and disgusting and it works, but it's something to see. I'll tell you that. So, hey, enjoyed it this week. Looking forward to talking to you on Friday night.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it too.
Friday Night Drive podcast as we reviewed week 6 here on Shaw Local. We'll see you next week.